Hi everybody. So again, we have people who don't understand Croatian. If you don't understand Croatian, okay. Is there anyone who doesn't understand English? Okay. So I'll speak English, and if you want me to translate anything, I can translate it. I did the slides again in Croatian because it's easier for me to look at Croatian and speak English. Is that helpful for you guys to have the slides in Croatian when I'm speaking English, or is it more confusing? It's the same? Okay. Okay, maybe next time I'll get even lazier and I'll just do it in English. But yeah, you can ask me to repeat anything or to translate. And when you are offering your own opinions, if you want to speak Croatian and one of us can translate, that's fine too. Hi. Hi. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. It's good to see you. Some new faces and some of you again. I wanted to start out by asking if you had any questions, thoughts, or reflections on our last meeting. So our last meeting we were talking about, okay, how do we define ethnographic film? And it's not easy to define, and people don't generally agree on how to define it. We talked about questions of the ethics, of the extent to which we consider ethnographic film some kind of an encounter with an other, or this kind of danger of exoticizing people that we're working with. And I tried to make an argument that because we don't have a great definition of, a clear definition of what ethnographic film is, or a great solution for how to deal with some of the ethical issues, that then provokes us to keep experimenting with different forms. And so that can be a kind of productive problem for us. But does anybody have questions or thoughts, things that they wanted to go back to from last week? Or thoughts they had this week when thinking about that? Yeah.
It's just a question about, like, from what we saw last week as a little samples, does ethnographic film never talks? Like, it always shows?
No, there's a lot of ethnographic film that talks, that does long voiceovers. And for example, next week, we'll watch a film by Margaret Mead, who is also a pioneer of ethnographic film, and she was famous for giving these voiceovers, and that's the way in which she tried to call our attention to the things that we might not notice if we were just watching it by ourselves. But that also became a kind of stereotype of what ethnographic film is, that we're watching people who are maybe different and exotic from our perspective, and what we're hearing is not their voices, but it's the voices of the anthropologist who is explaining to us. So the second part of the axe fight, that one where there's the scene of the fight, and then the second part, they used intertitles for that, but there are a lot of ethnographic films where the way to sort of explain to the audience what's happening would be with voiceover. And then there became a kind of critique of that, and a playfulness with that, or a rejection of that.
But if you ask them, like, if you ask the people involved, just like in the last movie, you ask them what is happening rather than having to explain it, is it still considered ethnographic film?
Yeah, it would be considered ethnographic film, and that's something that, for example, we'll watch one film by Jean Rouch today, and we'll talk about him again next week. But one of his famous films was, he filmed this scene of migration along the Gold Coast, and then he recorded at least one of the guys who was doing that, doing his own voiceover. So yeah, there are people who experimented with the use of voiceover like that. Anybody else? Mm-hmm.
I'm Rahela Jurkovic. I haven't been last time.
Okay.
And I passed through slides. I'm what is called in Croatia ethnologist and cultural anthropologist. And I would like that you tell me, perhaps I'm wrong, but from your, okay, I understood that you, perhaps, there are too many definitions of ethnographic film, so we cannot tell this is the one which is correct. But still, my impression was that you put focus on colonization, decolonization. So I'm not, perhaps I'm wrong, but for me, ethnographic film is not only about the other in the sense of the other who is from, I don't know, the other culture, and especially not colonization, because this is not true for us who are not coming from this Western society, so-called. So I would just like that you explain me, perhaps I got it wrong.
No, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think that by dealing with that first, in that first session with this idea of the other, I wanted us to confront maybe the stereotype that we have of what ethnographic film is, and what some of the leading critiques of ethnographic film have been. And I think, you know, like the quote that I put up from Catherine Russell is making this argument that the history of ethnographic film is intertwined. It's coming about at a certain time when there's this fascination with the other. So some of the first films in the US, for example, that were called ethnographic, as we showed, were not made by anthropologists at all. They were made by filmmakers who thought this would be an exciting topic to show some exotic people in faraway places who, or not even in such faraway places, but Native Americans in the US. But there was this idea that there's something different about them, about their traditions, and that we need to capture that on film before modernization changes that. So that's one idea that people have about what ethnographic film is, and I don't think that that's all that ethnographic film is at all, and that's why we're kind of continuing to look at different ways that different ethnographic filmmakers have tried different techniques. But I think there was still a lingering question for us in our discussion last week of, okay, if it's like, is there any way to not treat whoever we're filming as some kind of an other unless we do some kind of autoethnography? And I think that what we're going to see today and next week in the two sessions, and to some extent maybe some of the films that we saw last week, are that we're making this argument that you can try out different techniques to collaborate with different people to make something together, for example. That it doesn't always have to be about sort of capturing something, that it can be more of a kind of collaborative process or a creative process. And yet but I think it's helpful to be always aware of some of the dominant criticisms of anthropology and of ethnographic film, because it's easy for us to sort of fall into the tendency to exoticize or to go for some kind of a stereotype if that's going to be effective. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but absolutely, I don't think that it has to be just a colonial project. But I think that we have to continue to challenge ourselves to be critical about, okay, I'm fascinated in this topic, and there's something very captivating about these people that I am spending time with, but how can I do that in a way that doesn't perpetuate some stereotype? How can I listen to them? How can I make something where they feel respected? Or how can we make something together where I'm not just pretending that we're making it together, but really I want to be in control and things like that. Is that helpful? Or
Yes.
okay. Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, let's go ahead and go forward. So I suggested that you could try some different things if you already have an idea or if you're looking for an idea. And most of what people sent me were emails where they described what their ideas were, and I wrote back to them with some ideas for films they might watch or things that they might keep in mind as they move forward. But does anybody want to speak quickly about an idea that they have that they wanted to present, or maybe when we get into small groups later, you can discuss them with your group or something like that if it feels intimidating to talk about it in front of everyone. Yeah.
It's not quite the whole project, but I brought something like it's more of a little montage.
Okay.
Of like draft idea that I had, which also goes in relation with how can we respect.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if now I show it or later on. So
maybe we can try to show it at the end. That would be great to see. Maya is here today, and she's going to present some of her work. So we'll try to reserve some time at the end, and that can also be some time where people talk about their ideas and things like that, because I think it's very early for you to be thinking about it. It's just if you wanted to sort of use the discussions to try to start thinking about something. Okay, so for today, I wanted us to focus on what I'm calling ethnofiction, that often gets attached to Jean-Rouge, who will discuss a bit today. But in general, I wanted us to think about what are the borders between ethnographic film and fiction film, because last week a lot of people had questions about, okay, what's the difference between a documentary film and an ethnographic film, and we talked about how an ethnographic film might make use of the ethnographic methodology of spending a long time with people, spending time learning the language, hopefully having that ongoing relationship that would give a special kind of knowledge rather than swooping in and out. But that doesn't mean the documentary filmmakers don't do that. But I also wanted to point out today the fact that ethnographic film isn't always strictly documentary. And I'm guessing a lot of you have seen different types of documentary films that are also kind of experimental documentary films or docu-fiction, or hybrid films. Does anyone have a favorite docu-fiction that they have seen that they think is interesting? Yeah.
There's a movie, Chinese movie, The Horse Thief.
The Horse Thief? Okay.
I think it's 1986. Martin Scorsese included his list of best movies of the decade.
Okay.
That was interesting.
And what makes it between documentary and fiction?
Well, basically, I don't know, because it has both. It includes, some traditions in Tibet, where people do some unusual cultural traditions, and then it follows a real story, which is fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both, basically. So it's like following the story and then inserting a certain traditions that people have in Tibet.
Yeah. Did you?
I just remembered, I don't know where we watched it, how I watched it, from Joshua Oppenheimer, The Act of Killing.
Okay, yeah, we were going, if we have time, we'll watch a little clip of that today. What is interesting about that use of fiction?
For me, I really enjoyed the part when they kind of recreated the whole thing that happened. If you're going to talk about it, I don't know then.
Okay.
But I enjoyed the part where the people who were like the actors were then watching themselves act and the film how it all came together.
Okay. So there's this reflexive moment of it's not just people on screen being people watching themselves. And something, I'll go ahead and spoil it a little bit, something that is interesting about that film is that the people who are reenacting these fictional moments are the ones who did it, who did these things originally. And I'm not even sure how much I want to show because they're scenes of them killing people, basically. So it's the killers who never were punished in any way for what they did, who were then invited to reenact the killing. So yeah, it's a very powerful movie that got a lot of attention because of that. But that moment of reflection is something we can find in other films as well. So, I mean, one thing I wanted to ask, how do you feel as a viewer when you're watching something and you're not sure if it's real or fiction?
I will tell you. I
Yeah.
don't feel good.
Okay.
I feel it's lost of my time.
Okay.
Because I want a pure documentary.
Yeah.
This summer I was in Gunja. I don't know if you know it. It's a summer film festival of young people who originated from, let's say, studio of creative ideas from Gunja. Gunja is on the border between Croatia and Bosnia, Brčko district. And we had this documentary, let's say, section, and they put some short documentaries, and finally they say, okay, this is fake documentary. And I asked them, what is the purpose of this, you know? Okay, this is fashionable, it is okay, but for me it's a waste of my time. Because if I'm watching documentary, I want really to see something that I can learn from. If something is hybrid or... Okay, and you cannot see what is not reality, for me it's not that. But okay, you asked just for opinion, so I give you...
Yeah, no. It's a valid opinion. I mean, so yeah, maybe you feel tricked, or you feel like you came to watch a documentary because you wanted to get some knowledge, and then you're not sure what you can take from it or what you can't. Does anyone have opinions about that they like this mix in some way, or when it's done in certain ways?
I mean, film is not reality. Film is just a reflection of, interpretation and reflection of
One person.
Yes, one person of one reality time, or I don't know.
But still, you can get some facts that you can reinterpret. No matter, I think that you can grasp what is the author's
Point of view, or
yes, or something. So this is like reading a book. I think even scientific book. You know, not everything should be written. There is lots of things that you can read there that you can reinterpret on your own way. And perhaps you will not agree with the author's interpretation, but still you have some facts that can be useful to you, interesting, or whatever.
Yeah.
Something I like about this mix that comes in mind is a lot of documentary about world wars when they react. I'm thinking of one I saw, which is called in French "Des lettres et des armes," which mean words and weapons, which follows through letters of soldier, the story of the war. So a lot of aspects are react,
Okay.
but sometimes they take real footage. So there is an interesting hybrid here, where you have real footages and you have like acted footages, and together it makes you like it's a TV show, but at the same time it respects some real facts. So in a respectful way, it can be really powerful.
Okay, so yeah, so maybe for reenactments, for historical things, for how do we show something that we can't film live anymore, it can be effective. I mean, I think there are other people who I've talked to about when they watch something that is maybe a bit staged, you know, they'll argue that they can feel that that's not authentic, that the conversation between the two people is a bit forced, that it's not the same thing, and that a really great ethnographic film, you know, is done by somebody who's spent enough time that everyone feels comfortable and that you can feel that. So you can also, I think, sometimes feel that discomfort in an ethnographic film that is a sort of strict documentary, but people don't necessarily feel very comfortable with the camera as well, but maybe it's even more so when it's too staged. Yeah.
I wanted to say, for me there's no difference between documentary and fiction. I actually think in fiction sometimes people can be more real, because they have this stage where they can be free.
Okay. Let's look at some. So I think something that is interesting about this category of ethnofiction, or if we think about that as a subcategory of docufiction, is that I hope we'll see today, there are lots of different ways in which you can be bringing in elements of fiction into a documentary film. And so just because there's been this kind of mix, or you could say that every documentary film has a little bit of some kind of creativity to it, or something that's not entirely natural, that as soon as you put your camera there, it's no longer completely natural, right? But because there's infinite different ways you can do that, it can be something that you can see time and time again, but it could still be productive because you could still try to do it in a new way. So we're going to start by talking about, you know, Robert Flaherty, who is often credited with the first full-length documentary film, and a lot of the critiques of him are that he staged a lot of things. So we'll talk about that. You know, you could argue that ethnographic film has always been a kind of ethnofiction from the very beginning. Then we'll talk about Jean Rouch a bit and some of his experiments. We'll look at Safi Faye, a Senegalese filmmaker who studied ethnography but then moved further and further towards full fiction eventually, and we can think about why that. If we have time, we'll talk a bit about Joshua Oppenheimer's film, and I wanted to also mention that, you know, there's this interesting history in Yugoslav film of this interest in mixing fiction and documentary styles, so that it's not just something that is coming from the US or France. Okay, so first of all, Flaherty, how many of you have seen Nanook of the North? Yeah, we're not going to watch Nanook. So as many of you know, that was a very successful film. It was similar to the films that we watched last week. It was this kind of adventure film. Maybe if I hold it farther away. It was this sort of adventure film about survival in the Canadian Arctic. Some of the controversies surrounding that film were, and other films he made, such as Man of Iran, was that he asked people to reenact ways of hunting using more traditional weapons that they weren't using anymore. So they were hunting in Nanook, they were hunting with rifles. But he said, no, the rifles are too modern. You need to hunt with a spear. In Man of Iran, he had them hunting sharks in a way that they hadn't been doing for 50 years. We'll watch a little bit of Moana today. Who's seen Moana? Okay. Okay, we'll just watch a couple of them. Have you seen it with sound? Yeah? Okay.
The sound is done by the daughter?
Yeah, so I mean they're different. So again, it was a silent film and the original score was lost. So, oh no, maybe I'm mixing it up. Anyway, it's a silent film. No, I'm thinking of, so it is a silent film. Flaherty lived in Samoa in this community for about a year before he started filming anything. So even though he wasn't trained as an anthropologist, you could say he took a more kind of anthropological approach to spending time there with his family, with his kids. And his youngest daughter, who I think was like 2 years old when they were there, 50 years later, she went back and recorded sound. She recorded music, she recorded dialogue, she worked with Samoan speakers to read the lips of the people on screen to try to reconstruct some of what they were saying. But then she doesn't do subtitles because when her father and mother were first filming it, they were working with interpreters, so they weren't really very conscious of what they were, of what was going on, but then you have this sound. So something I want to suggest with this in terms of thinking about our relationship to past ethnographic films, even ones that we find problematic, is that there are different ways in which you can revise them. And this didn't actually come out in its restored form until 2014. One of the controversies surrounding this film was, this is a very pixelated picture, but they asked the protagonist playing Moana to do this tattoo ritual, which apparently hadn't been done for some time, so they had to pay him a lot of money to have this lengthy tattoo process, which was done all over the lower part of his body.
Kako? Kayu mak kako lo? Kako ikai? Tapo? Tua.
Ya, boleh.
Ya, seperti itu kako ikai.
Ya, boleh.
Okay, I'll stop it there so that we can keep moving forward. But first, I would love for you to discuss in some small groups of maybe 4 people or so. What in the... I lost my voice last weekend after this talk. What in what you saw seems like maybe it was staged or maybe manipulated, or what seemed sort of not natural to you is one question. And what in the film makes it seem like an ethnographic film are the 2 questions. And then the third question is, can a film, can the fictional elements have ethnographic value. Does that make sense? I'll write them in a slide and put them up because I don't think these are the questions I first wrote. So if you would just turn to speak with, make a little triangle or square.
Ali sad je bilo dalje nego
Okay, I'll make an announcement.
It's also about the reaction. I made it. I took scenes from documentaries that I like that have graphical values for me, and I wanted to see unique things that give context to the image. We don't know what happened, and I wanted to see what people see in
A možemo probati sad pa.
Stare sprave, a ono što je stirano, to bilo staro, nekad za love.
A mislim da je okej jedan.
Ono njega tražimo.
To je atmosferski.
Ipak ranije, to snimanje
samo jedno, to je to,
If we can come together, I'm excited to hear what you all think, and then we'll keep going with a couple more clips, and then we'll have more discussion too. Anybody have quick? I mean, I don't know everything that was authentic or faked in this film, but did anyone have any feeling when they were watching it where they were thinking, okay, this is maybe not natural, or no? Okay. I mean,
hide and seek scene.
Okay, so perhaps that was kind of staged because they had to set up the camera and things like that. Yeah.
I have something. I really don't feel that in these scenes that there was this notion that it needs to be real, that it's really pushing it to that we feel that this is the true representation of reality.
Okay.
There's no this paradigm of this.
Yeah, and I mean, and it was with this film that John Grierson coined the term documentary, because he said that it has real documentary value. So when Flaherty is filming this, he doesn't have this category of documentary in his head, because in a way they're still in the business of inventing it, of making those distinctions that come later. But nonetheless, Grierson argued that it had real documentary value. There's a review of the film from, I think, 1975 or 1979 that makes this argument that it has, strong ethnographic value. So one of the things that was that he did change was the way that they were dressed. So they weren't wearing that kind of clothing anywhere. They were wearing things that had more elements of Western clothing. So you could argue that by having the women bare-breasted, he was in some ways encouraging this kind of exotic view that we have of life in Samoa. But that was one of that, and the tattoo were the things that I know about. What about it seemed to have ethnographic value, or what made it feel like an ethnographic film to you? I mean, what are we seeing in the first scene? What is most of it?
Everyday life.
Okay. So, it's about them gathering these leaves. It's about, it shows them gathering the taro, their bread. So it's about, similar to his other films, which were more adventurous films about hunting, and there are some hunting elements in this one. It's about how do people live, right? And so if we want to think about, okay, if we want to assign something some ethnographic value, and it's not just about exoticizing and othering people, I think a lot of us would say that there's a value to it in which we can see some kind of a way of life, right? So it doesn't have to be traditional ways of life, it doesn't have to be non-modern ways of life, but that we see that, and that's something that's valuable about it, whereas another film might have more kind of value to it because we get to see the inner psychology of a person. But films could have both, obviously, right? What did you think? Can things that are fictional have some kind of ethnographic value to them, nonetheless?
For example, we were commenting on how the sound that was added later, which is obviously then fictional in a way, but they were singing while they were going away. So I don't think they would be singing in their everyday life with 50 kilos or 100 kilos on their back. But it has ethnographic value because it's their song.
Right. Yeah. And we could imagine situations in which perhaps people would be excited to reenact ways of life that they no longer practice, but so that they would have those as some kind of a record. But yeah, I think the music is a great example of that, and it was something that the Flahertys remarked on when they left, that they were sad that they couldn't record sound because the singing to them was so powerful. Okay, so the next film I want to show is by Jean Rouch, and so Jean Rouch is someone who started, I think, as an engineer working in Africa, and then studied anthropology and became an ethnographic filmmaker. And he is famous in ethnographic film for lots of different innovations. Maybe a lot of you have seen Chronicle of a Summer. Yeah? Okay. I thought maybe a lot of you had seen that. This one is, has anyone seen The Human Pyramid? Yeah? Does somebody, do you want to set it up? Do you want to give us an idea of what the... You haven't talked yet.
No, but I got it, so I know it's a fiction, but so I don't want to spoil it.
Okay. Do you want to set it up? Okay, all right. We're going to watch the beginning in which he pretty much explains it. So unlike some of the other films that we're discussing today, he's very explicit about what he's doing. So he sort of sets this up as he's going to make this kind of social experiment with students. I'll give a little bit of background and say that he was filming this right at the moment of decolonization of France in Africa. And he was interested in going to the Côte d'Ivoire to look at race relations between white students and black students. And he realized when he got there that there weren't any relations between them. And so he got this idea for this film. And we see his manipulation of the characters in front of the camera. He makes it very explicit. And yet his idea is that by doing this kind of social experiment, we can actually change those relations, at least for the people who are involved in that. So we'll watch the first few minutes of that and see what you think.
Ce film est l'histoire difficile de l'amitié entre blancs et noirs. Denise et Nadine sont actuellement étudiantes à Paris. Elles sont amies. Pourtant, il y a un an, en Afrique, bien qu'élèves du même lycée, elles ne se connaissaient pas. C'est à Abidjan, capitale de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, que j'ai proposé aux élèves du lycée de Cocody de tourner un film montrant justement ce que pourrait être une amitié sans aucun complexe racial. Je ne sais pas si Nadine vous a dit ce que je voulais faire. Je voudrais faire un film qui montre les rapports des Africains et des Européens dans la classe de première du lycée d'Abidjan. Alors j'ai demandé à Nadine de vous faire venir ici, et Denise doit venir tout à l'heure avec les Africains pour que l'on voit d'abord si vous êtes d'accord et si vous avez des idées sur le film que l'on peut faire. Et quel est le but du film? Le but du film est de montrer comment à Abidjan, les Africains et les Européens peuvent arriver à se côtoyer, à vivre ensemble. Alors évidemment, il faudra montrer le pour et le contre, et je vais être forcé de choisir parmi vous des victimes qui seront chez les Africains et chez les Européens des racistes.
Ça ne nous attirera pas d'ennui?
Non, pas du tout, puisque je prends la responsabilité du scénario. Donc si ça attire les ennuis, c'est à moi-même. raciste de tenir des propos de racisme. Si je faisais un film sur les voleurs, je serais forcé de demander à quelqu'un de jouer le rôle d'un voleur. Évidemment, il vaut mieux que le vol soit vraiment fait, mais à ce moment-là, moi je deviens complice de ce vol, même si je suis avec une caméra.
Au début, ce sera un film d'amateur alors.
Pourquoi d'amateur? Il n'y a pas de film d'amateur ou de professionnel.
Une professionnel, ce que vous dites, vous débuterez comme ça avec nous sans savoir sur les dates, ça sert quelque chose ou pas.
Bah, c'est une expérience que je fais.
Le scénario, par exemple, il est tout composé ou ça?
Non, nous le ferons avec vous, avec nos camarades européens. On décidera, au fur et à mesure, on décidera ce qui va se passer. Il y aura peut-être des gangsters, il y aura peut-être des bandits. Le film que nous avons ainsi réalisé, au lieu de refléter la réalité, crée une autre réalité. L'histoire n'est jamais arrivée, mais s'est construite en cours de tournage, les acteurs inventant à leur guise leurs réactions et leurs dialogues. L'improvisation spontanée étant la seule règle du film. Monsieur, veuillez passer ici au tableau.
Moi, Nadine, je viens d'arriver en Afrique. Je suis nouvelle. C'est la première fois que je suis en classe avec des Africains. Denis, je dois faire médecine.
Jean-François, ingénieur. Quickens. Paul, capitaine au long cours.
Jacqueline, entomologie.
Alain, ingénieur électronique. Jean-Claude. Je vais faire musicologie.
Denise, pharmacie.
Bacchus, professeur de philosophie. Et Lola. Brillante carrière politique. Raymond, Dominique, agro.
Ami, médecine. Célèbre, sociologie. Dès le premier jour, Alain me raccompagne. C'est un grand garçon, pas trop mal. Il a déjà essayé de se rendre intéressant. C'est un athlète, c'est le meilleur nageur. Son père est en bourse, il est seul ici. Alain veut être ingénieur, voyager, les bateaux, les avions, l'aventure, une fille à chaque port. Alain est un homme blasé, car l'amour sans amour c'est absurde. Pendant les vacances de Rambouillet, il a couché, vraiment couché avec une fille. Une Suédoise sensationnelle, dit-il avec un petit air fanfaron. En attendant, Alain veut me faire connaître Abidjan. Et pour Alain, Abidjan sont des vacances perpétuelles. Jean-Claude, lui, habite chez ses parents. Il a déjà sa voiture. Chaque jour, il va à la piscine. C'est là qu'on retrouve Denis, Alain, Jacqueline, Paul, Quickly. Et, sans savoir comment, je fais déjà partie de la petite bande. Alain a raison. Abidjan, c'est la ville de vacances. Les éternelles vacances. J'habite une maison dans un grand jardin au bord de la lagune. Je suis presque toujours toute seule. Ma mère est restée à Paris et mon père est souvent en Beauce. Heureusement, il y a les copains. Mes deux préférés sont Alain et Jean-Claude. Surtout Jean-Claude. Physiquement, je préfère Alain. Et Jean-Claude a un air de chien battu qui m'émeut beaucoup. Il a de jolis yeux. Je ne sais pas ce qu'il cherche. Par exemple, il prend prétexte de m'aider à faire mes devoirs de maths, mais il est encore plus nul en maths que moi. Je lui plais, je crois. C'est drôle, j'aime bien que le garçon. Mais je n'ai pas envie de flirter avec lui. D'ailleurs, je n'aime pas flirter. Jean-Claude a été en classe avec nos camarades africains depuis qu'il est tout petit. Je ne sais pas pourquoi, je lui demande si on les voit quelquefois en dehors du lycée, et Jean-Claude dit que non. Il ne sait pas pourquoi, mais ça ne se fait pas.
Monsieur le père, this big man, I think I'm a fine boy. Look at the next time. I want to win good to people.
Alors, si vous continuez, vous allez avoir des ennuis en perspective. Il y a des ennuis en perspective.
Personne n'a rien fichu. Les politiques donc ces petits européens, ce sont toujours eux qui commencent le chêne. Le bac n'a-t-il donc aucune importance pour eux? Naturellement, ce sont tous des fils à papa. J'habite à Trècheville chez des amis parce que mes parents sont en Haute-Volta. Ma mère voudrait que je sois pharmacienne plus tard. Bon, peut-être que je ferai autre chose. Sociologie par exemple. J'aime bien tout ce qui se rapporte aux civilisations primitives en général. Mais pour ça, il faut d'abord parler de bac. Et mes copains, je me demande comment leur faire comprendre qu'il faut qu'ils travaillent. Maintenant, ils suivent toujours l'exemple des petits Européens. Ils sont toujours les premiers à cheviter avec eux. Baka, c'est un grand sportif. Il est champion universitaire de la Côte d'Ivoire, en saut en longueur et en 100 et 200 mètres. Son père est planteur de café de la région de Waké. Plus tard, il veut être prof de philo. Mais pour être prof de philo, il faudra travailler. Raymond, c'est notre musicien. Il habite un petit village de l'autre côté de la lagune. Je le connais depuis toujours. Je le taquine tout le temps, je l'appelle Bee, à cause de ses gros yeux. Et lui m'appelle Small, parce qu'il m'a connue quand j'étais toute petite. Et pour lui, depuis, je n'ai pas grandi. C'est un garçon formidable. Dans notre classe, j'ai deux amoureux, Elola et Dominique. Dominique est un peu snob, mais très gentil. Elola, lui, c'est un numéro. Il veut plus tard être Premier ministre. On ne s'ennuie jamais avec lui. Il est tout le temps en train de nous sortir des grosses blagues. Il m'appelle sa destinée, et moi je l'appelle mon Don Quichotte. Il a pour à toutes les filles. Je les aime bien tous les deux. Nous, les Africains, nous habitons presque tous Trècheville. Ce n'est pas très joli, c'est un peu sale. Mais pour nous, Trècheville, c'est tout. C'est toute notre enfance, tous nos souvenirs. Les garçons sont tous amoureux de Nathalie. C'est très joli, très gentille. C'est la vendeuse de la boutique du Triomphe de l'Église. Celle-là, elle est électrique, explosive. Elle là, il va pas?
Oh, ça te va d'être fois de mettre sur l'âge, ma chérie.
À vrai dire, il n'y a pas de racisme avec les gens. Mais on préfère rester entre Africains. Les Européens ne savent pas danser. Nous, on préfère le tipi, le cha-cha, les merengue. Les Européens, ils ne dansent que des valses, des tangos, des slows, pendant des heures et des heures. C'est cassant, là. Nadine m'a dit un jour qu'à Paris, elle aimait bien aller dans les endroits où l'on jouait des typiques. Peut-être qu'elle aimerait venir ici. J'essaierai de l'emmener un jour.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez déjà de notre classe cette année?
Moi, en tout cas, je trouve pas qu'ils sont très sympathiques. Hein. Surtout la dernière qui vient d'arriver, surtout Nadine. Mais non, tu peux pas la juger. Elle vient à peine d'arriver. Je suis un psychologue, mon cher ami. Psychologue, ça ne fait rien. Ça ne fait rien. Ah, moi, je suis des psychologues, comme vous faites, hein. Mais je l'ai jugé du premier coup d'œil.
Là, tu vois, je suis pas dans la vie. Moi, je trouve au contraire qu'elle est très sympa.
Elle me parle quand elle est en difficulté.
Ouais.
Elle me plaît vachement. C'est l'amour, c'est l'amour. Oh, Jean-Claude, oui, je le préfère. Il m'a l'air d'un petit bandit en tout ça.
Oh, il est très sympathique. Il y en a un autre, Alain. Ah, je le trouve très gentil. Il m'a dit qu'il avait toujours vécu en Afrique. Il a l'air de connaître très bien les Africains.
Tu me parles d'Alain, là? Tu parles à la tête, là? Moi, il a une tête de Satan. Alors, moi, je me méfie. C'est ma nature, je ne peux rien. Quand il s'agit d'Européens, je me méfie. Ici, avec vous, je parle plus facilement avec vous qu'avec des petits Européens. Je les juge. C'est difficile, je ne peux pas vous expliquer. C'est la nature. C'est la nature d'un Africain, comprenez.
C'est quand même drôle. Depuis des années que je suis la camarade de classe de ces petits Européens, je ne suis vraiment l'amie d'aucun d'eux. Pourquoi? On ne se déteste pas, mais on s'ignore. C'est idiot.
Voilà, piscine ce soir,
C'est idiot d'être si loin et de ne rien connaître de l'Afrique. Ils sont pourtant intéressants, tous ces Africains. Denise, Raymond, Landry, Barker et ce Shelter des Lolins. Je ne peux pourtant pas aller les trouver. J'ai une idée. Je vais en parler à la banque. J'en ai marre de cette côte d'Azur, cette petite bande où on raconte toujours les mêmes histoires, et on n'en sort pas. Je voudrais vous poser une question. Pourquoi ne voit-on jamais nos camarades africains? Jacqueline, tu n'as pas envie d'être amie avec Denise?
Depuis longtemps que j'ai la famille, on doit rester entre Européens. Les Africains ne sont pas assez intelligents, ils sont trop bêtes, voyons.
Oh oui, moi je les ignore ces gars-là. Je leur dis tout juste bonjour quand je ne peux pas faire autrement, sinon je leur parle pas. C'est pas que je ne puisse pas les voir, c'est pas ça. Je m'en occupe pas, moi je n'existe pas.
T'as raison de les ignorer. Tu vois, ces gars-là n'ont combien d'années de civilisation? Peut-être 100 ans au maximum. Ils n'ont sans arriver à rien faire de bon jusqu'à présent. S'ils se rapprochaient de nous, mais que le
Ils sont rapprochés dans quel sens?
Tu vois, moi, ce que je comprends dans se rapprocher, ayant qu'ils ont très peu de civilisation, ils ont très peu de civilisation, c'est derrière eux. On ne peut pas les comprendre et eux ne peuvent pas nous comprendre. Qu'est-ce que tu as dit? Tu les laissais dans leur coin et tu ne leur parlais jamais.
Donc tu n'essayes pas de les comprendre.
Nous sommes seulement élevés par rapport à eux. Eux, quand même, regardez leurs conditions de vie, ils sont si bas. Ils se contentent de peu de 50 francs par jour et peuvent vivre d'une boule de manioc. Tandis que nous, combien nous faut-il?
Option valideuse. Eux, ils ont tout inventé. Mamadou, je sais pas quoi, il a inventé quoi? Il a inventé la bombe atomique avec la bouche de début.
Mais les évolués, qu'est-ce qu'ils sont les évolués? Si on cherche bien, je te donne un exemple. Un évolué, c'est un métamorphose. Bon, il va forcément lui faire passer une radio. Alors voilà, ils ont rien de mieux à dire. Ma femme, elle essaie, elle va se faire radiodiffuser. Tu crois que c'est l'intelligence? C'est bête, c'est tout simplement bête. Pas du tout.
Enfin, moi je suis bien d'avis de Jacqueline. Ces gars-là, non. Moi je trouve qu'on n'a pas les mélanger avec nous.
Nadine, toi tu ne peux pas parler. Tu es une débarquée. Ça fait combien de temps que tu es en Afrique? Tu ne peux pas parler. Si tu les connaissais vraiment à fond. Voilà, un qui apprend à l'école le coche et la mouche. Tout le monde connaît ça, quoi, le coche et la mouche. Franchement, allez bien, tout ça. Et voilà comme il traduit ça. Ah, la mouche, il vient, il commence à piquer le cul, alors. Ah, puis il commence à courir, pousser son vagin jusqu'à haut la côte. Quand il arrivait le haut la côte, il piquait tout le cul, tout le monde. Même mon père ne pouvait pas faire son tas dans la lèvre. Vous connaissez la manière qui se comme ça à la tête? Bon. Ah, mouche, là, c'est pas couillon, hein. Tu crois que c'est intelligent, ça? C'est bête, c'est stupide. Je tiens par cœur que c'est trop bête. Je l'ai appris par cœur, j'ai retenu ça. Par exemple, on a fait une bêtise pareille que je l'ai retenu. Je l'ai pas appris par cœur.
Il y a des éléments valables dans cette classe. Autant prendre des éléments que tout le monde trouve valables. Enfin, en ce qui concerne Alain, il est d'accord avec moi. Nadine arrive, elle n'a aucune raison de ne pas être d'accord. Hein? On prend ces gars-là et on en fait quelque chose, on les met avec nous, on vient voir comment ils vont réagir. Il n'y a pas de problème, on sent qu'ils ont envie de faire quelque chose. Mais on s'y oppose par des raisonnements comme le tien absurdes, car ton truc ne tient pas debout.
Ah, mon raisonnement est absurde, monsieur. Ah, je ne te comprends plus. Toi qui avais vécu pendant combien d'années avec les Africains, tu n'arrives pas à comprendre mon point de vue. Mais qu'est-ce que tu as dans la tête? Tu es aveuglé par ces Africains, non? Oh, moi je ne te comprends vraiment pas. Ici c'est qu'on dise blanc pour que les Africains disent noir. Tu sais très bien ça, tu vas chez toi. Tu mets le pain comme ça, ils vont le mettre comme ça. Pourquoi? Seulement pour te contrarier.
Mais s'ils sont si belles, pourquoi ont-ils des premières places en français,
Parce qu'ils appellent tout par cœur.
Mais c'est de la bêtise. Quand on ne sait pas exposer un jugement, quand on n'a pas d'explication à soi qui soit intéressante, qui ait un fond personnel et rien ne vaut, voyons. Alors, moi je suis pas d'accord avec vous. Non, 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 c'est rien du tout.
Nous, Européens, blancs, ayant reçu l'instruction française depuis notre naissance, nous arrivons en classe de première avec des gars qui ont reçu l'instruction africaine jusqu'à l'âge de 6 ans ou 7 ans et qui arrivent également en première. Mettons qu'ils aient 2, 3 ans, 4 ans plus que nous, ça n'a aucune importance. Nous sommes tous, à l'heure actuelle, sur un plan d'égalité. Or, dans une classe en France, il y a des gars qui s'entendent et des gars qui ne s'entendent pas. Et ça, Nadine qui arrive de France peut nous affirmer une pareille chose. On prend des gars avec qui on s'entend, qu'ils soient blancs ou noirs, et on les met dans le coup.
De toute façon, moi je suis peut-être une débarquée, je raisonne peut-être par sentiment, d'accord? Mais en tout cas, je sais quelque chose.
Ah, tu as tort. Les Européens doivent rester unis. Même si on s'entend pas, on doit certainement avoir une certaine fraternité entre nous parce que nous sommes blancs de couleur. Je voudrais bien, moi aussi, être comme Jean-Claude, voir dans les noirs beaucoup de bien. Mais je ne peux pas. C'est pas de ma faute, je ne peux pas. Quand tu vois que les évolués que nous, disons évolués, qui reviennent de France avec des diplômes, c'est pourquoi faire, il faut que la bagarre. Qu'est-ce qu'ils vont essayer de soulever les Noirs contre les Européens? Et qu'est-ce que nous voulons? Nous voulons que leur bien.
Mais tu en veux du bien, toi, avec les raisonnements que tu tiens? Alors que tu dis que de ces gars-là on ne peut rien en faire, on n'en fait pas jamais rien, il faut que les Européens restent ensemble et tu veux en faire du bien, mais ça me dégoûte, ça me révolte.
Ils ne comprennent rien, ça, alors.
Mais si, tu dis qu'on vient ici pour leur faire du bien, mais nous les Blancs on reste ensemble, pas d'accord?
On va leur donner l'exemple.
Et bien pour donner l'exemple, il faut qu'ils viennent avec nous. Il faut qu'on sorte ensemble.
Non, vous comprenez rien, vous êtes tous des idiots.
Non, rien à faire, je suis d'initiative contre l'intégration.
Vous pensez être sûr de votre bac? Oui, je suis certain.
Pourquoi pas?
Messieurs, le fait qu'il est l'heure, vous avez la chance. Vous passez la semaine prochaine. Sauvé par le plan. Non, merci. Sauvé par le plan. Ah ouais, tu sais, dans tes pays, on n'a même pas vu la portée. Pas la peine. On n'a même pas ça. On n'a pas la portée. Au revoir. Ciao, bye. Ciao. Ciao. Désolé, je crois que je voulais te dire de la part de tous les camarades qu'on voudrait pouvoir plus souvent sortir ensemble. Je sais pas, se fréquenter entre Européens et Africains.
Moi, d'accord, on va tirer et à ça.
On va voir. Demain, encore, tu n'en plus tard. Oui.
Allez, au revoir.
Ciao. Bye. Bye, les gars. Bye.
Okay. And so there, the experiment within the experiment begins. And you can find this on YouTube, by the way, if you want to watch the entire film. I want us to discuss this, but I want us to discuss it with another film. Sorry, just a second. By someone who, a Senegalese filmmaker, who she acted in another one of Jean Rouche's films that was similarly this kind of blend of ethnographic film. It was supposed to be this reverse ethnography where an African character goes to Paris and makes his observations about Paris as a kind of ethnographer, and she plays a role in that. And it was through that she found out, I think, what ethnography was. She doesn't necessarily cite Rouche as her mentor, but after that she went and did her PhD in Paris, and she shot mostly documentary films, but they mostly had some fictional elements to them. And then her last film that she made in 1996 was purely fictional. So the one that we're going to watch today is not that one. It's one that is in more of what's considered a sort of traditional documentary mode. But there are some elements of it that are not just an observational mode, and I'll show the scene where there's something happening that is not really happening. But we'll start from the beginning, and then we can put these two films in conversation with each other. You can discuss them together. So this one is called Fajal. And I think one thing that I think is interesting is, like the human pyramid, it also starts out in a classroom, but there are different things happening in terms of colonialism and knowledge happening in the two films. So we'll start with that. And I'll show a couple of different parts from this. Okay, so here we see some scenes of everyday life, of working the land. They're groundnut farmers and millet farmers. And then I'm going to skip us ahead to another scene of education and kind of knowledge production in a different setting.
Ma'am, bakit niyo panulog ka ba? Tama na ako. Wala kang rentas ka alago? Rende, subuklat na ni Ab. Nag-implement na tao si Alo. Ma'am, dili buga nga ni Talino. Nung buga ba ni Talino? Nung kasaan pa yan ang buga na Talino. cosaan waaw wax ngeen dëgg ndax war ngeen ko xam
Assalamualaikum. Faja day jigéen a ko sañtoon jigéen ki ñu doon wax Mbang Faja moo ko sañtoon waaw jigéen la woon ndax Faja moo jëlee woon fii ba jot la fi la Faja moomu juróom-ñaari penc la woon defe naa sax ne dégg ngeen turi jot la fi la Ngaakaan moo doon penc bi gënoon a mag ci Faja boobu nag dëkk bi amuloon buur dafa di dëkk boo xam ne amoon na dugub amoon na ceeb amoon na nag géej baa ngi woon fii boo nattee nga am jën àll baa ngi woon fii ñu di sii rabbu Faja janki ujalanga ujalo ujalange ujale moo tekki ne Faja boo liggéeyee nga reetaan boo liggéeyee ñu reetaan la te fi njogoy rabakat la woon daf doon rab ay ñay te fi njogo boobu moo seyoon ak mutu mutu ñaari mu di setti Mbang Faja mu yóbbu ko fa ooy di rey ay ñay mu tuddi ko nag ñi di ko reetaan ne mu tut ànd muy jooy di way ne Faja laa juddoo yëkk ma fi indi laaj leen ko keeteen jogoy
jagaam ke lay ma teen matini mil daal Faja loolu mel moo bi yit axam mam teeno keeri mu ngi ñaar
We see some other scenes of everyday life. There are some scenes of dancing. And then there's this interior scene I missed. The first time I watched it, I was like, did she really just give birth that calmly? But there's no umbilical cord, so I watched it a couple of times. No, she didn't just do that. So, okay,
wait,
so
the
I
baby, sorry, the baby was like,
staged, okay.
yeah, like the baby was hidden underneath her skirt. Just
yeah,
like
I mean, if you watch it
silently.
again, it's cutting away a few times. So
Oh.
there are these close-ups. So there's a way in which, yeah, at some point they kind of could hide the baby. I'm assuming, but when she picks it up, there's no umbilical cord. We don't see the placenta coming out or anything.
But well, maybe
like
that was cut out then. We don't know really.
Maybe it's wonderful, like artificial lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think she just gave birth on camera, but maybe not, or maybe there are parts, yeah, that were cut out. I don't know for sure. I couldn't find a lot about that film in particular in English, and was too lazy to read in French. But I thought for a few minutes now you could discuss these two films and sort of compare them. So in the first one, we not only see them kind of exposing the fictional element of it by having this discussion in front of the camera of this is what we're going to do, right? Then there's also this whole setup before they even start to interact with each other where we get to know the characters. There's this kind of elaborate love triangle happening with the new girl. And then eventually we have those two scenes of the white students and the black students each kind of discussing the fact that they don't interact with each other. And if we remember from when they were discussing the premise with Jean Rouge, he told them, okay, some of you are going to be against this and some of you are going to be for it, and you need to sort of stick to that role, right? And so some people, when they've written about it, they've said, okay, the kind of racist characters were really playing up and exaggerating that racism, and by doing that they weren't having as much of a sort of honest discussion about, okay, what is the kind of everyday racism. But so I wanted to have you discuss sort of what about those conversations were interesting for you. What kind of ethnographic value does a film like that have if it's all staged like that? And do you think that as Rouge hoped, that cinema has the chance to sort of change their lives and change their relations with each other, as he seems to believe? And then how does the second one compare? What kind of ethnographic value does it have? We don't see the same kind of staging of that's just my screensaver, I think. We don't see the presentation of her telling us what is staged and what is just observed. Is that a problem? Okay, so if you want to talk in your groups again for a few more minutes.
već bilo...
The first one has lots of fiction in it, but what is the maybe yeah. So what ethnographic value is there in the first
Moi je suis de mais j'ai pas vécu en France. J'aime bien Moyen-Orient. C'est sûr, je vous les conseille à découvrir à fond le vraiment de toute façon. Tu vois, hier j'étais dans un resto, t'as un mec français qui vient, il parle en français en mode, il veut même pas essayer l'anglais. C'est bien qu'on essaye, tu vois. C'est mignon, l'accent quand ça va, quand on comprend, ça va. Vraiment, j'aime pas l'accent.
Non, il y a plein de gens
en fait d'avoir ces expériences sociales, quand bien même que c'est révélé en fait au protagoniste même. Ce qui manque pour moi, c'est une réaction. Oui, pour l'instant, tu vois. En fait, ça m'a rappelé les archives de Lina. Je sais pas si tu connais. Lina, c'est un peu les vieux. Par exemple, les archives de Lina, c'est des mecs qui vont faire des expériences sociales, qui vont aller demander à des femmes dans les années 60 est-ce que votre mari vous violente? Que pensez-vous de moi? Et ils ont un discours en fait très neutre, très pur, mais qui montre aussi la complexité de ces questions-là. Et
peu ces expériences sociales pour moi, il manque la c'est intéressant aussi d'être confronté à faire le miroir par rapport au spectateur. Tu vois ce que je veux dire? Par exemple, ici, en fait, la question que je me posais, c'est que quand on disait les filles, ils ne sont pas comme nous, blancs, éduqués. En fait, je me posais la question, qu'est-ce que ici, ils diraient, tu vois, limite j'avais envie de faire ça, tu vois. Donc là, je trouve ça intéressant. Et
Okay, look, let's continue now because we don't have that much time left, and we have a guest today who I want to give the last 15 minutes to. But I'm really happy that everyone seems to have ideas and opinions and things to say. But and one thing that okay, thanks. And you guys in the back, you ready? Yeah. Okay. One thing I need to say before I forget, and it's difficult with this many people, but you all saw the email I sent last week, and if you didn't, let me know and I can resend it to you, that it includes a Google Doc folder that you should have access to that has the slides and some articles related to this week. It also has an information sheet about my research, and I want you all to be aware that I would like to write about this for my own research, and I would write academic articles about that, and it might be part of a book someday. For this classroom, it'll be anonymous, and it's very easy for it to be anonymous because it's so big. I don't have time to ask everyone your names, and so but if you don't want to be part of it, like if you said something in class and you don't want that to be anything that I write about, even with a pseudonym, you can tell me, and I'll make sure that I don't use that in my study. Okay? And then as we go forward with making the films as well, you can always tell me at some point, like I don't want to be part of this study at all, or I told you something that's personal and I want to make sure that you don't use that or anything like that, if that makes sense. Okay? So please just let me know if you have any questions about that. We have a special guest this week, so I'm going to wrap things up sooner, but I do want to hear from a few of you, what did you think of the two films? How did you compare them? What did you think about the very kind of staged nature of the first one and this kind of social experiment that he makes? Maybe about that one first, about the human pyramid that we saw with the students.
I always have this concern with ethics, and I'm not sure this would be approved.
Okay, why?
Nowadays. Mm-hmm. Because I think it could create some situations where it's really psychologically disturbing to hear some of the kind of like super exaggerated racisms, and maybe there could be like serious conflicts even arising from that. And I was just telling to Amar about that movie that's inspired by a real story that has a similar setting, which maybe you've seen it. It's Die Welle. It's a German movie, The Wave. It's inspired by a similar experiment, but that took place in California, and then they dramatized it the movie set in Germany because it made more sense. Mm-hmm. But it's about a professor of sociology who divides his class into Nazis and socialists or something like that. Okay. And then in the real story, some of those students committed suicide by the end.
Okay. So yeah, even when we're doing something that we're calling fake or just a game or something like that, that there can be real emotions that that people put into that, or consequences to it. And I think, yeah, I mean, Lucia's point is sort of the opposite, that, you know, even if this is all staged, there's something real that could happen in terms of the positive race relations that could come out of this. But yeah, and we only saw these kind of like very exaggerated stereotypes at the beginning, but that could have consequences afterwards. Yeah.
To add with what we discussed with Anna, I thought there was a lack also of reaction in the first movie. For me, it reminded me a bit of this kind of social experiment you can see on YouTube, for example, after the Bataclan terrorist attack in Paris. There was an experiment where someone came with a t-shirt, "I am not Charlie," meaning like fuck the people who were killed, you know. And it's also a bit called Boal theater, which is like few actors know that they're acting, but the public doesn't know there is something staged. And what's interesting is what is the position of everyone but in the moment. So for me, the first movie was like this setup, but without the interesting part, which would be the reaction, like telling ourselves what we would do in this moment, what we would say. And for example, in this YouTube video, there is another actress that came and says, "How dare you?" And then they eat up the argument, and then someone comes and say, "I agree with you, they deserve to die," and someone else comes, "How do you say that?" And because no one knows there is a hidden camera, so we can ask ourselves about ethics, about filming people without consent, but
and
it's real.
Right. Yeah, and then sort of what do you do with that afterwards? I mean, I think if I were going to my ethics committee in the UK, or back when I was in the US with something like this, where I was asking people to talk about very sensitive topics, they would probably want to know what kind of process will there be afterwards for people to talk about their feelings. So some kind of debriefing. Are you going to give them access to some kind of psychological help afterwards if they're asked to talk about something that happened that is stressful or that was traumatic? So we can think about and so we don't always see all of those things in the moment when we're watching these. So with Lucia's film, he does watch these things with the students, and they change. And he ended up filming it over a longer amount of time than he wanted to. And something that happened was the students developed more kind of sophisticated viewpoints about race relations as they matured, because another ethical issue is the fact that they're high school students. So maybe they're willing to go along with this game without maybe fully understanding the consequences of it. And what about for the actually, I'm gonna skip ahead because Maya is here from Berlin, and I want her to present her work today. So I'm going to sort of go through really quickly the other slides that I had prepared that you can look at on your own. But I think the points that I wanted to raise came up already in our discussion. So we talked about the ways in which elements of fiction can also be used in documentaries a lot through different types of reenactment, and there can be different experiments with that. And so the act of killing by Joshua Oppenheimer is this interesting example where he was interested in the mass killings in 1965 to 66, these death squads that were responsible for killing anyone who was accused of being a communist, and the fact that they were still that these gangs were who did all this killing were still free and were very proud of what they had done. And he invites them to reenact it, and they do it in this very kind of stylized way because they really romanticized gangster films. But you see as the film goes on, even though at first it seems like they're very sort of smug and laughing about what they had done, that it actually becomes this kind of trauma that they end up reliving that they haven't ever dealt with. So it raises other ethical questions that I think are complicated and uncomfortable. And so some people, it ended up getting executive produced by, I think, Werner Herzog and Errol Morris, but then there are others who found it to be just a very sort of exploitative film that just sensationalizes this violence that never got published. And then last, I just wanted to point out that there's an interesting history of docufiction, or the kind of playing with the genres of fiction and documentary in Yugoslav film, which I'm sure you are all more familiar with than I am, but someone who I think continues to do this in a way that's interesting is Jelmer Žilnik. And so I was going to have us watch a clip from his, I think maybe it's his last film, but The Most Beautiful Country on Earth, that is about migration, and it takes place in Vienna. And there are some elements of it that feel very documentary, and I think it advertises itself as a documentary film, and yet you have these scenes where you can see there's like continuous editing, so the camera cuts and all of a sudden he's on the train, and so you realize that that it's not just a sort of observational film. And he also did interesting interventions as well that were sort of social experiments, as you all probably know. So now I just wanted to invite Maya to come up here because she has experience with another approach that brings together experimental film and ethnographic film through found footage. So she's going to explain her project that she's done and show a clip of it. Yeah?
Okay, thank you. Should I also take the mic?
Yeah, because I think with the recording it's useful.
How long can I talk? Just to know.
You've got about, let's say, like 15.
Yeah, okay.
15 minutes. So maybe talk for 5 minutes, show 3 minutes, and then.
Okay, I will try. So, yeah, I'll do it fast. So just to present myself, I'm Maja Milic, and I work with conceptual and experimental artist projects that could be kind of in the fields of experimental film, expanded cinema, performance, installations, radio, experimental sound, and experimental and conceptual publishing that I'm doing lately. And around 2014 I got interested in ethnographic films, so I kind of studied it by myself. But of course I was interested in the experimental part, or what happens later. And at the same time I got interested into found footage films. So in my master my master was on the topic of found footage as experimental ethnography, like alternative history through home movies and amateur cinema. I think I named it that way. But then I wrote a thesis, and a film is a result of that, which I will show a piece of it, but the film in the concept is anyway fluid and never finished, and a kind of rhizomatic structure that can go anywhere at any point. And I think I will keep changing it and keep working on it my whole life maybe. So I just wrote some notes. So what I'm interested in is experimental autoethnography, because I believe just autoethnography is okay. Because from film we know that the author is never objective. So of course I was interested in the concept of the other. Who is it, where we draw the line, but I'm interested in like the other within, so within ourselves, which actually could mean a minority, or I think of that like banality as minority. That means like I was guided by this Bruce Conner quote. Bruce Conner was the guy who did the first maybe found footage film. But he said, if you want to know what's going on in a culture, look at what everybody takes for granted, put your attention on that rather than on what they want to show you. So I'm kind of focused on this, what we take for granted, which I think is banality, like banal stuff, really, real banal usual stuff that we don't notice. And the second thing I'm interested in is also the archive and the history, but kind of as institutionalized power. But I'm interested on the opposite, what didn't get to the archive, or what again could be kind of a minority, and banality as minority. So, for example, like anti-document concept, that means like something opposite of, not against document, but a document that is used in the opposite way. So not to tell a story, but maybe to open up the meaning, not to close it down. Meaning that when you tell a story, you're precise in the meaning, but I think like artists can do some other things, like I'm trying to really make it. So I don't forget something I like is like, I wrote an article from my thesis that is about the artist as ethnographer or the artist as archivist. And I believe that the artist can say about ethnography something that scientists cannot, and I believe that this is on the level of what Barthes calls the obtuse meaning. So I wanted to read something about this, but I don't know if we can. We don't have time, but it's just a really short. Roland Barthes added a third meaning to the informative and symbolic one, an unspeakable poetic grasp. Like he calls it the obtuse meaning. By contrast to the first two levels of meaning, the informative communication and the symbolic signification, the third level is that of significance, like referring to the signifier without the signified. I'm just skipping parts. Obvious, for example, means that which comes ahead. In our case, which comes to seek the recipient out, which presents itself quite naturally to the mind. The obtuse meaning, on the other hand, is persistent and fleeting, smooth and elusive, a supplement that an intellect can't absorb. Obtusus means that which is blunted, rounded in form, a roundness that causes a reading of meaning to slip, opening the field of meaning totally and infinitely, a multi-layering of meanings which always lets the previous meaning continue. Blah blah. Anyway, I believe that in this level of meaning, so it is the third level in semiology, if you want. An artist works in this level. So I, for example, think always in that level of meaning. So I don't want to tell a story, I don't want to symbolize anything, I want to bring things in connection, and maybe it means something to someone sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, because something that I think fiction, bringing in fictional elements to ethnographic film can do is that it can give it a story, whereas otherwise maybe it's hard to make a story about everyday life. But something that like Krakauer have written about, there's this affinity between documentary and experimental film sometimes, in that there can also be a rejection of the story. You can say, like, we don't care about story, that you could choose to do, or maybe you decide you really do care about story. Okay, so now we'll watch the first maybe 5 minutes. Yeah? Okay.
Or we can
watch part one. How about if we just watch part one, and then I think that's nice because it's about 5 minutes, and then if you want to come up and talk with Maya afterwards, or with me, or with each other, we'll be free then. Okay. stop it there because we have to get ready. There's another event coming in, but I'll send the link to everyone so that you can watch it if you want to come up and talk to Maya about this work. I think it's really cool. Next weekend we'll meet Saturday and Sunday because it's my last weekend, so I hope to see you all both days. I'll send an email with links and an exercise. Again, it's just a suggestion. Feel free to come and talk to me now, and feel free to email me during the week. Hvala vam.